And then you wrote, "I wish I never married her. Don't deny it!"
Sarah, Mark, we need to talk now.
I should have known something was wrong when Alicia spent 3 hours getting ready for a Halloween party. 3 hours for a costume that barely covered anything, adjusting that ridiculous Catwoman mask like she was heading to the Met Gala instead of Richard's backyard bash. "You look great, Greg," she said without even glancing at my pirate outfit. The fake sword felt heavier than it should have as I watched her check herself in the mirror one more time. Very authentic. The way she said it made me want to throw the plastic cutlass in the trash. But I didn't. I just grabbed my keys and followed her out to the car, wondering when my wife of 8 years had started talking to me like I was a stranger she was being polite to. Richard's place was already packed when we arrived. The smell of grilled burgers mixed with cheap cologne and fruity drinks. I recognized most of the faces behind the masks. Same crowd we'd been hanging out with since college. Same people, same jokes, same drama recycled year after year. "Greg, there's my favorite logistics manager." Richard appeared beside me, dressed as a vampire, complete with plastic fangs that made him lisp. "How's the supply chain treating you?" "Can't complain," I said, accepting the bottle he handed me. "Business is steady, which means I'm steady." "That's what I like to hear. Stability is underrated." He clinked his bottle against mine. "Speaking of which, where's your better half?" I scanned the crowd and found Alicia near the fire pit, laughing at something Dominic was saying. He was dressed as Tarzan, naturally. All that time at the gym had to be shown off somehow. His wife Susie stood nearby in a fairy costume, but she might as well have been invisible for all the attention anyone was paying her. "She's making friends?" I said. Richard followed my gaze and nodded slowly. "Yeah, Dom's been quite the entertainer tonight. Guy's got stories for days." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully, but before I could ask what he meant, Nikki appeared at his elbow. "Richard, honey, we need more ice," she said, then turned to me. "Greg, love the costume. Very swashbuckling." "Thanks. You make a convincing witch." She laughed. "I'm supposed to be a sorceress, but I'll take witch. At least you didn't guess librarian like the last 3 people." As they headed inside, I found myself alone with my beer and my thoughts. Neither was particularly good company. I watched Alicia lean closer to Dominic as he gestured wildly, probably telling another one of his famous gym stories. The firelight caught the shine of her costume, and I noticed how she kept touching his arm when she laughed. When had she stopped laughing at my jokes like that? I was still pondering this when Dominic caught my eye across the fire and raised his bottle in a mock salute. There was something in his expression, a smugness that made my jaw clench. I raised my own bottle in return, but it felt more like accepting a challenge than returning a greeting. The party continued around me. People danced to music that was too loud, told stories that got more exaggerated with each telling, and gradually paired off into the usual clusters. I tried to mingle, but my attention kept drifting back to Alicia and Dominic. They'd moved away from the fire now, standing closer to the house where the shadows were deeper. "You okay, man?" I turned to find Jake, dressed as a zombie, looking at me with concern. "You seem a little distracted." "Just thinking about work stuff," I lied. "You know how it is. On Halloween. Come on, Greg. Live a little." He gestured toward the crowd. "When's the last time you and Alicia cut loose like this?" That was a good question. When was the last time we'd done anything together that didn't involve discussing bills or whose turn it was to take out the trash? I couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at me the way she was looking at Dominic right now. "I'm going to grab another drink," I said. The kitchen was quieter, though not by much. I was reaching into the cooler when I heard voices from the hallway. Familiar voices, speaking in the kind of hushed tones that usually meant trouble. "Can't keep doing this," Alicia was saying. "Doing what?" Dominic's voice was lower, but I could still make out the words. "Having fun? Enjoying ourselves? You know what I mean. People are going to notice. Let them notice. What's the worst that could happen?" I pressed myself against the kitchen doorway, heart hammering in my chest. This was the kind of conversation you stumbled onto in bad movies, the kind that changed everything. Part of me wanted to walk away, pretend I hadn't heard anything. The other part needed to know how far this had gone. "Greg's not stupid," Alicia said. "He's already asking questions about why I'm at the gym so much." Dominic laughed, and the sound made my hands curl into fists. "Greg's got his head so far up his spreadsheets, he wouldn't notice if you danced naked on his desk. Besides, what's he gonna do? Challenge me to a duel?" They both laughed at that. My wife and her, whatever Dominic was to her now, laughing at the idea that I might actually fight for what was mine. I stepped into the hallway. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying more clearly than I'd intended, "I was thinking more along the lines of a conversation." Alicia spun around, her face going pale beneath the Catwoman mask. Dominic just smiled, like this was all part of some game he was winning. "Greg," Alicia said, "we were just talking about your gym routine." "Yeah, I heard." I looked between them, noting how they'd instinctively stepped apart when they saw me. "Sounds like you've been getting quite the workout." Dominic crossed his arms, making his muscles bulge in that way he probably practiced in mirrors. "Problem with that, Greg?" "Depends on what kind of workout we're talking about." The hallway suddenly felt very small. Other partygoers were starting to notice the tension, conversations fading as people turned to watch. This was exactly the kind of scene I'd spent years avoiding, the kind of public drama that followed you around a small town forever. But standing there, looking at my wife's guilty face and Dominic's smirk, I realized I was past caring about making scenes. "Maybe we should take this outside," Alicia said quickly. "Why?" I asked. "Afraid people might hear something interesting?" Dominic stepped forward. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you heard. I heard my wife talking about sneaking around behind my back. I heard you laughing about how oblivious I am. My voice was getting louder, but I couldn't seem to stop it. I heard enough. Greg, please." Alicia reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Please what? Please pretend I didn't hear you planning your next secret gym session? Please keep pretending everything's normal while you two—" "While we what?" Dominic interrupted, stepping closer. "Say it, Greg. What exactly do you think is happening here?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. He wanted me to accuse them outright, probably so he could play the innocent victim, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I think," I said slowly, "that you two have been having a lot of fun at my expense, but you know what they say about all good things." Before either of them could respond, I turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Behind me, I could hear Alicia calling my name, but I didn't stop. I grabbed another beer from the cooler and headed for the back door. The yard was still full of people, but they all seemed to be watching me now. Word traveled fast at parties like this. By tomorrow, half the town would know that Greg and Alicia had some kind of fight at Richard's Halloween bash. By next week, everyone would know why. I found a quiet spot near the fence and tried to process what had just happened. 8 years of marriage, and it had come down to a whispered conversation in a hallway. All those late nights at the gym, all those errands that took longer than they should have, all those times she'd seemed distant and distracted. It all made sense now. That looked intense. I turned to find Richard approaching, minus his vampire fangs. His expression was serious now, concerned. "How much did you hear?" I asked. "Enough to know you're having a rough night." He leaned against the fence beside me, the wood cool under his forearm. He smelled like cigarettes and old cologne, the same familiar mix he'd always worn. but tonight it felt like a comfort rather than an annoyance. Want to talk about it? Not really. I took a long pull from my beer, feeling the carbonated burns settle in my chest. The yard behind my house was still lit by the weak sodium glow of the street lamp, and the Halloween decorations on the porch rattled in the wind like bad applause. But I might need a place to crash tonight. Doors always open, you know that. He was quiet for a moment, then added, softer. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, man. This sucks. Yeah, it does. I looked back toward the house, where through the curtained window I could make out Alicia and Dominic, shoulder to shoulder, leaning into each other as though some invisible magnet pulled them close. They were small shapes in a domestic tableau that used to be my life. Up close, it felt like watching a slideshow of betrayal. But you know what? I'm done being the guy who doesn't notice things. I'm done being the punchline. The words tasted like gravel as they left my mouth. For years I'd been the steady one, the fixer. Tighten the screws, patch the roof, make dinner when she worked late. It had bought me safety, the illusion of stability. Now that safety looked like the thin veneer it always was. Richard nodded slowly. What are you going to do? I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the fence post with more force than necessary, the glass making a hollow thunk. I'm going to make sure they remember this Halloween for a very long time. He studied me, brow furrowed. That sounds ominous. You thinking mischief or a meltdown? Depends on how cooperative they are, I said. I'm not talking about breaking bones or burning houses. I mean something they'll feel in their heads every time they walk past the front door. Something that puts the story back where it belongs. Richard's face softened a little. Smart. Keep it cold. Keep it clean. I don't know if I can keep it clean, I admitted. But I can keep it clever. He shrugged, the movement betraying the small smile that wanted to creep onto his face. That's the old Greg I remember. That night, I slept poorly on Richard's couch, the cushion molded to his shape and stubbornly unreceptive to mine, and woke up with the dull throb of a hangover and the heavy taste of regret. My phone was a small, pulsing indictment on the coffee table. 17 missed calls from Alicia, a dozen texts stacking like tiny accusations, and 3 voicemails that I wasn't ready to listen to. My thumb hovered over the first voicemail and then moved away. Fighting and pleading over a speaker felt too performative, too much like the public spectacle I'd been trying to avoid. I peeled open one new notification that stopped me cold, a Facebook alert. Someone had posted a video. I opened it with the practiced dread of someone about to read something that would change everything. The footage was shaky, grainy, shot from the edge of the porch, and it captured the blurred edge of the argument, my accusing face, Alicia's expression when I called her out, Dominic stepping forward like a man who thought a fight could fix things. What the clip didn't show, what it couldn't quite represent, was the context. The furtive messages I'd found on her phone, the late nights, the receipts with different names, the way they laughed a little too softly in the grocery aisle when they thought no one could see. What it did show, with brutal clarity, was me walking away while they stood there looking like the sympathetic victims of a jealous idiot. The algorithm loves a narrative, and the short version of that footage was already writing one. The comments came like rain after a storm. They were small stabs that added up. Poor Alicia. Greg always seemed like the controlling type. Dominic handled that well. Stayed calm even when Greg was losing it. Maybe if Greg spent less time working and more time at the gym, his wife wouldn't need a workout partner. That last one stung because I knew the name attached. Janet Morrison, who worked at the boutique downtown with Alicia. I felt exposed in a new way, like a private wound suddenly under fluorescent lighting. If the people at her workplace were already picking sides, I was losing more than a marriage. I was losing the narrative that would let me sleep at night. Morning, sunshine. Richard appeared at the doorway with a cup of coffee and a sympathetic grimace. He handed me the mug like it was a small peace offering. Rough night? Getting worse by the minute. I showed him my phone, the screen full of cold public judgment. He scrolled through the comments, his frown deepening as if each line was a splinter. Social media's poison, man, he said, blunt and true. Don't let these idiots get to you. Easy for you to say. You're not the one being painted as a crazy, jealous husband. Are you? Crazy and jealous, I mean? His question was blunt, but it wasn't hostile. Richard had the kind of friendship that didn't spare you flattery. He gave you truth. I considered it. Probably. But I'm also right. Yeah, you are. He sat down across from me, the couch springs sighing beneath him. Look, I wasn't going to say anything, but since it's already out there, I've seen them together, at the gym, around town. He shrugged, as if he'd been carrying the knowledge like a stone and was finally letting it tumble free. They're not exactly subtle. How long? My voice came out tight. Couple months, maybe more. I kept hoping you'd figure it out on your own, or that it would just fizzle. He looked at me apologetically. I should have said something. No, you shouldn't have. The words were sharper than I'd meant. That was my job, and I screwed it up. He didn't argue. Instead, he leaned forward and tapped the table, thoughtful. So, change the narrative. I looked up, tired and baffled by how simple that sounded and how complicated it would be. What do you mean? You're a logistics guy, right? You solve problems for a living, so solve this one. He said it like he was reminding me of a skill set I had neglected to use where it mattered most. You know what really happened. You have proof they were sneaking around. Use it. I don't have proof of anything except a conversation in a hallway, I admitted. My mind replayed the night like a scratched record, the pressure in my chest, the words I couldn't take back, the look on Alicia's face when I named the other man. Then get some, Richard said, the tone becoming practical. These days, everyone leaves a trail. Text messages, social media posts, credit card receipts. If they're having an affair, there's evidence somewhere. He tapped his temple with a finger, as if to emphasize the obvious. People are sloppy when they think they're invisible. The idea nagged at me. It felt invasive, voyeuristic, in a way that clashed with some old code of mine about privacy and dignity. I don't want to be that guy, I said quietly. The one who goes through his wife's phone and follows her around town. You're already that guy, Greg. The only question is whether you're going to do something about it or just let them make you look like a fool. After Richard left for work, I sat alone in his living room and tried to figure out my next move. Going home didn't appeal to me. Alicia would want to talk, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Going to work seemed pointless. I couldn't concentrate on supply chain logistics when my personal life was falling apart. Instead, I found myself driving around town, not really going anywhere, just thinking. I ended up at Murphy's Diner, a place where the coffee was strong and the gossip was stronger. If I wanted to know what people were really saying about last night, this was the place to find out. I wasn't disappointed. Saw the video this morning. Poor thing looked mortified. Well, what did she expect? You can't carry on like that and not expect people to notice. Greg seemed pretty upset. Can't say I blame him. Still, making a scene like that at a party. There are better ways to handle these things. I ordered coffee and a piece of pie I didn't want and listened to the conversation swirling around me. The town was divided, it seemed. Some people sympathized with Alicia, painting her as the victim of a jealous husband's public outburst. Others thought I was justified in calling her out, even if my timing could have been better. But everyone was talking about it. In a town this size, that was both good and bad news. Greg? Greg Thompson? I turned to see Mary Patterson, who worked at the bank where Alicia and I had our accounts. She was looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Hi, Mary. I saw, Well, I heard about last night. Are you okay? I'm fine, just trying to process everything. She nodded knowingly. These things are never easy. If there's anything I can do… Actually, I said, struck by a sudden thought, there might be. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to check their joint account activity, they could do that online, right? Of course. You have access to all your accounts through the website. Is there a problem? No problem. Just curious about some recent transactions. She gave me a look that suggested she knew exactly what I was really asking, but nodded anyway. Well, if you need help with anything, you know where to find me. After she left, I pulled out my phone and logged into our bank account. I'd never paid much attention to the details before. I handled the big picture finances, Alicia managed the day-to-day spending, but now I was looking at everything with new eyes. Gym membership fees, restaurant charges on days when she said she was running errands, gas station purchases in parts of town she had no reason to visit. None of it was conclusive evidence of an affair, but it painted a picture of someone who wasn't where she said she was going to be. My phone buzzed with another text from Alicia. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, You're right. It has gone far enough. Way too far. I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I drove to the one place I knew I could get the answers I needed. Richard's bar. Not because I wanted to drink. It was barely noon. But because Richard had mentioned something about security cameras. Back already? He asked when I walked in. I thought you'd be home dealing with the fallout. I need to ask you a favor. Those security cameras you installed last year, do they cover the back patio? His expression grew serious. Yeah, they do. Why? Because I think you might have recorded something interesting last night, something that happened before our little hallway confrontation. Richard was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the back office. Let's go take a look. The security system was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Richard pulled up the footage from the previous night and fast-forwarded through the early part of the party. We watched people arrive, mingle, dance, and drink in fast motion until he slowed it down around the time I remembered seeing Alicia and Dominic by the fire. There, I said, pointing at the screen. Can you zoom in on that? The image quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Alicia and Dominic, standing closer than friends should stand, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist, and then, just before they moved toward the house, a kiss that lasted longer than any kiss between friends should last. Well, Richard said quietly, that's pretty definitive. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, that my suspicions were just the product of an overactive imagination and too much beer. But there it was, recorded in digital clarity. My wife kissing another man at a Halloween party, while I stood 50 feet away, oblivious. Can you make me a copy of this? Greg, what are you planning to do? I'm planning to stop being the guy who doesn't notice things. That evening, I finally went home. Alicia was waiting in the living room, still in her pajamas, her eyes red from crying. The Catwoman costume was draped over a chair like a discarded skin. Where have you been? She asked. I've been worried sick. I've been thinking. About what happened last night? Greg, I can explain. Can you? I sat down across from her, noting how she avoided eye contact. Because I'm really curious to hear your explanation for this. I pulled out my phone and showed her the security footage. Her face went white as she watched herself kiss Dominic, her expression cycling through shock, denial, and finally resignation. How did you get this? Does it matter? The question is, how long has this been going on? She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 months. 3 months. I repeated the words, trying to process them. 3 months of lying to my face. 3 months of sneaking around behind my back. 3 months of making me look like an idiot. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just did. Things like this don't just happen, Alicia. They're choices. Every secret meeting, every lie about where you were going, every time you came home and pretended everything was normal, those were all choices. Tears were streaming down her face now. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Work through what? The fact that you've been having an affair? Or the fact that you and your boyfriend spent last night laughing about how oblivious I am? She flinched at that. You heard us talking. I heard enough. I heard you talking about sneaking around. I heard him making jokes about how I wouldn't notice if you danced naked on my desk. The words tasted bitter. I heard you both laughing at me. We weren't laughing at you. Weren't you? I stood up, pacing to the window. Because that's what it sounded like. That's what it looked like when I saw you two together tonight, whispering and giggling like teenagers. Greg, please. I made a mistake, but we can get past this. I turned to look at her, this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. No, we can't. Because this isn't just about the affair, Alicia. It's about the lying. It's about the disrespect. It's about the fact that you made me into a joke without even having the decency to let me in on it. What are you saying? I'm saying that you and Dominic wanted to have your fun at my expense. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. I headed toward the stairs. But now it's my turn. Your turn to what? I paused at the bottom of the staircase and looked back at her. To make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. The next morning brought a new wave of social media activity, but this time the tide was turning. Someone, I had my suspicions about who, had shared the security footage from Richard's bar. The video was grainy, and the timestamp showed it was taken before our confrontation, which changed the entire context of what happened that night. Suddenly, the comments were different. Oh, wow. Greg wasn't being paranoid after all. Poor guy. No wonder he was upset. Alicia and Dominic deserve each other. Both cheaters. I was reading through the responses when my phone rang. Susie's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. She was Alicia's best friend and Dominic's wife, which put her squarely in enemy territory as far as I was concerned. But curiosity won out. Hello, Susie. Greg, we need to talk. Her voice was tight, controlled. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour? I don't think that's a good idea. Please, there are things you need to know, things about what's been happening. Something in her tone made me reconsider. Fine, 1 hour. I found Susie in a corner booth, wearing sunglasses despite being indoors. When she took them off, I could see why. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. Thank you for coming, she said. What do you want, Susie? I want to apologize, and I want to help you. That wasn't what I'd expected to hear. Help me with what? With making them pay for what they've done. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know about the affair, Greg. I've known for weeks. And you didn't think to tell me? I was hoping it would end on its own. I kept thinking Dominic would come to his senses, realize what he was throwing away. She laughed bitterly. I was naive. Why are you telling me this now? Because of what happened last night. The way they acted after you confronted them, like they were the victims. The way they sat in my living room afterward, planning how to spin the story to make you look like the bad guy. Her jaw tightened. I'm done protecting them. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Susie had always been dramatic, prone to getting involved in other people's business. But there was something different about her now, a hardness I'd never seen before. What kind of help are you talking about? She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. Not hers, but one I recognized as Dominic's. He left this at my house last night. I've been going through their text messages. Susie, they've been planning this, Greg. Not just the affair, but what to do when you found out. They have a whole strategy worked out. She scrolled through the messages, her expression growing darker. Look at this. She handed me the phone, her hand trembling slightly as if the weight of what she'd discovered had aged her overnight. I took it carefully, scrolling through the thread, my stomach tightening with every line. Dominic. What if he finds out? Alicia. He won't. Greg's too focused on work to notice anything. Dominic. But if he does? Alicia. Then we stick to the story. You were helping me with my workout routine. Nothing inappropriate happened. Make him look paranoid and controlling. Dominic. What about Susie? Alicia. She'll believe whatever I tell her. She always does. I stared at the screen, rereading the exchange twice, maybe 3 times, as if repetition could make it make sense. The words didn't just sting, they burned. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the calculation, the sheer confidence in how easily they thought they could manipulate everyone around them. They planned this, I said finally, my voice rough. They actually planned how to lie their way out of it. Keep reading, Susie said quietly, her face pale but resolute. The next messages were time-stamped just a day earlier, after the Halloween party, after the public humiliation that had already set our lives on fire. Alicia. That was a disaster. He knows something. Dominic. So what? We stick to the plan, make him look crazy. Alicia. The video makes it hard. People are starting to take his side. Dominic. Then we change the narrative. Say he's been suspicious and controlling for months, that you were afraid to tell him about your friendship with me because of how he'd react. Alicia. Will that work? Dominic. Trust me. By the time we're done, everyone will see him as the problem, not us. The phone felt heavier than it should have. I handed it back to Susie, my pulse drumming in my ears. How long have you known about this? I found the phone this morning, she said, clutching it like something toxic she couldn't put down. He must have left it on the counter last night. I started reading and I couldn't stop. She wiped her eyes with a napkin that had already given up the fight. 12 years of marriage, and this is what I get. A husband who thinks I'm too stupid to figure it out, and a best friend who thinks I'll believe whatever she tells me. I'm sorry, Susie, I said softly. I know this is hard. You know what the worst part is? She said, her voice shaking, though her eyes were sharp now. They're right. I have been believing whatever Alicia told me. When she said she was working late, I believed her. When she said she needed space, I believed that too. She straightened in her chair, her tone hardening. But I'm done being the naive little wife who doesn't ask questions. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something different there, a flicker of steel under the heartbreak. What do you want to do about it? A slow smile spread across her face, not warm or kind, but razor-edged. I want to give them exactly what they've been planning to give you. I want to make them look like the liars and cheaters they are. How? The fall festival, she said simply. It's this weekend. The whole town will be there, including them. They're planning to put on a show, act like the innocent victims of your jealous rage. But what if we had a different show planned? Over the next hour, Susie outlined her plan with the precision of someone who had spent years watching, listening, and filing things away. It was meticulous, ruthless, and, if I was honest, a little terrifying. She knew Dominic's weak spots, his ego, his temper, his fear of public embarrassment. And as Alicia's closest friend, she knew exactly what would unravel her composure. The right phrase, the right setting, the right pressure. The beauty of it, she said, eyes glinting, is that we don't have to lie about anything. We just have to make sure the truth comes out at the right time, in the right way. I leaned back, letting the implications sink in. This could backfire spectacularly. It could, she admitted, without a trace of hesitation. But doing nothing definitely will backfire. They're already rewriting the story, Greg. By next week, you'll be the controlling husband who drove his poor, frightened wife into another man's arms. I looked at her, then at the phone lying between us, still glowing with the evidence of their conspiracy. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the cafe's refrigerator and the faint hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Finally, I nodded. All right, let's give them a story they won't be able to spin. She wasn't wrong. I'd already seen how quickly public opinion could shift based on a single video. If Alicia and Dominic got their story out first, shaped the narrative to their advantage, I'd never recover from it. Okay, I said finally. What do you need me to do? The fall festival was one of those small-town traditions that everyone complained about but nobody wanted to see disappear. Local vendors set up booths selling crafts and food. There was a small carnival with rides that had seen better days, and the volunteer fire department organized games and contests throughout the day. It was also the kind of event where everyone in town showed up, which made it perfect for what Susie and I had planned. I arrived early, helping Richard set up his beer booth near the main stage. We'd agreed that he would serve as our lookout, keeping track of where Alicia and Dominic were and signaling when it was time to put our plan into action. You sure about this? He asked, as we arranged cases of beer behind the counter. Once this starts, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. I checked my phone for the third time in 10 minutes. They want to play games? Fine. But they're going to play by my rules now. Alicia and Dominic arrived around noon, making a grand entrance near the main gate. They were dressed casually, but carefully. Alicia in a sundress that showed off her gym-toned figure, Dominic in a tight t-shirt that displayed his muscles. They looked like the perfect couple, attractive and confident. What they didn't look like was two people who were sneaking around behind their spouses' backs. I watched them work the crowd, accepting sympathy and support from people who'd apparently bought into their version of events. Alicia played the part of the wounded wife perfectly, accepting hugs and kind words with just the right amount of brave vulnerability. Dominic stayed close, protective but not possessive, the supportive friend helping her through a difficult time. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. They're good, Richard observed, following my gaze. I'll give them that. Yeah, well, so are we. The first phase of our plan began around 2 o'clock, when the dunking booth opened for business. Dominic, ever the show-off, had volunteered to be one of the targets, probably figuring it would make him look like a good sport while giving him another chance to show off his physique. What he didn't know was that Susie had rigged the game. "Step right up," she called out, manning the booth with enthusiasm that seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "3 throws for $5. Dunk the muscle man." A small crowd gathered, including several teenagers who were eager to try their luck. The first few throws missed, which was expected. The target was small and the throwing distance was significant. But then Susie made her move. "Come on, folks, this should be easy," she called out. "After all, Dominic's used to getting wet when his wife's not around." The comment was delivered with a bright smile and a laugh, as if it was just friendly teasing between spouses. But several people in the crowd exchanged glances, picking up on the underlying tension. Dominic's smile faltered for just a moment. "Very funny, honey." "Oh, I'm just getting started," Susie replied sweetly. Then, louder, "Did everyone see the video from the Halloween party? My husband's quite the performer when he thinks nobody's watching." Now people were definitely paying attention. Phones came out, and I could see the crowd growing as word spread that something interesting was happening at the dunking booth. "Susie," Dominic said, his voice carrying a warning. "What? I'm just proud of my husband's athletic abilities." She turned to the crowd. "He's been working out a lot lately. Extra sessions at the gym, private training sessions, very dedicated." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. I could see people whispering to each other, putting pieces together. Alicia appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as she realized what was happening. "Who wants to take a shot?" Susie continued, holding up a baseball. "Come on, don't be shy. I'm sure Dominic would love to get dunked. He's had plenty of practice going down lately." That did it. Someone in the crowd laughed, and the sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding the scene together. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once, phones were recording, and Dominic was climbing down from the dunking booth with a face like thunder. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed at Susie. "Wrong with me," she replied, still smiling that bright, dangerous smile. "I'm just being supportive of my husband's hobbies. All of them." Alicia pushed through the crowd, grabbing Susie's arm. "Stop this. You're making a scene." "Am I?" "Funny. I thought I was just having fun at the fall festival. You know, the same kind of fun you've been having behind my back for the past 3 months. The crowd went quiet. This was better than any soap opera, and everyone knew it. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alicia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't you?" Susie pulled out Dominic's phone. "Because I have about 50 text messages that say otherwise. Should I read some of them out loud? I'm sure everyone would find them very interesting." "Give me that." Dominic reached for the phone, but Susie stepped back. "Now why would I do that? These are such sweet messages. Listen to this one. 'Can't wait to see you tonight. Tell Greg you're working late again.'" She looked up at the crowd. "That was sent last Tuesday. I remember because Greg called me looking for Alicia that night. Said she wasn't answering her phone." I stepped forward then, right on cue. "That's right, she wasn't. I was worried something had happened to her." "Oh, something happened all right," Susie continued. "Just not what you thought. Should I keep reading?" "Please don't," Alicia whispered. "Why not? These are beautiful love letters, very romantic. Although I have to say, some of the language is a bit graphic for a public setting." The crowd was eating this up. Phones were recording from every angle, and I could already imagine the videos spreading across social media. By tonight, everyone in town would know exactly what had been going on. "You're both crazy," Dominic said, but his voice cracked slightly. "This is harassment." "Harassment?" I stepped closer to him. "That's interesting, coming from someone who's been harassing my wife for 3 months. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. She was a willing participant, wasn't she?" "Greg, please." Alicia tried to intervene, but I wasn't done. "No, I think it's time we cleared the air about what really happened at that Halloween party. See, everyone's been talking about how I made a scene, how I embarrassed my wife in public." I looked around at the crowd. But what they didn't know is what I'd just discovered. What I'd just heard. "Don't," Dominic warned. "Don't what? Don't tell the truth? Don't let people know that my wife and her workout partner have been sneaking around behind our backs? Don't mention that they were planning how to lie their way out of it if they got caught?" The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "You want to know what I heard that night?" I continued. "I heard my wife and this man talking about how to keep their affair secret. I heard them laughing about how oblivious I was. I heard them planning their next hookup." "That's not," Alicia started. "It's not what? Not true? Because I have the security footage that says otherwise. I have the text messages that prove it. I have 3 months' worth of lies and deception documented in black and white." Dominic's face was red now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "You think you're so smart, don't you? The wronged husband getting his revenge?" "I think I'm someone who got tired of being made a fool of." "You were already a fool, Greg. You think Alicia was happy with you? You think she enjoyed coming home to your boring life, your boring job, your boring everything?" The insult hit its mark, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled. "You know what, Dominic? You're probably right. Maybe I am boring. Maybe I'm not exciting enough for someone who needs secret gym sessions and clandestine text messages to feel alive." I turned to address the crowd directly. "But you know what I'm not? I'm not a liar. I'm not a cheater. And I'm not someone who makes promises I don't intend to keep." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, someone in the crowd started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the applause was thunderous. Alicia was crying now, her carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. Dominic looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground, and Susie was still smiling that dangerous smile, holding her husband's phone like a weapon. "Well," she said cheerfully, "this has been fun, but I think it's time for me to go file for divorce. Anyone know a good lawyer?" As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement over what they'd just witnessed, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. I wasn't sure I'd ever be truly happy about the end of my marriage, but it was something like justice. Alicia approached me as I was helping Richard pack up the beer booth. "Greg, we need to talk." "Do we? I think we've said everything that needed saying." "Please, not here, not like this. Can we go somewhere private?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The woman I'd married was still there, underneath the guilt and the tears and the makeup that was now running down her cheeks. But she was also a stranger, someone who'd been living a double life while I went about my boring, predictable routine. "Okay," I said finally, "but not at home, somewhere neutral." "Richard's?" she suggested. I glanced at Richard, who nodded. "You can use the back office. Take all the time you need." 20 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in the cramped office behind the bar. Alicia had cleaned up her makeup, but she still looked fragile, broken. "I know you hate me right now," she began. "I don't hate you. I'm disappointed. I'm angry. I feel betrayed and humiliated, and about a dozen other things. But I don't hate you. Then maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can find a way to move past it." I shook my head. "There's no moving past this, Alicia. Not the affair, not the lying, and definitely not what happened today. What happened today was cruel. You humiliated me in front of the entire town. I told the truth in front of the entire town. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like revenge to me. Maybe it was. Maybe I wanted you to feel a fraction of what I felt when I realized my wife was sneaking around behind my back. Maybe I wanted you to understand what it's like to be the punchline of everyone else's joke." She was quiet for a long moment. "I never meant for it to happen." "But it did happen. And when it did, you chose to lie about it. You chose to make me look like a paranoid fool rather than just admit what you'd done." I was scared. Of what? Of losing me? Because that was going to happen anyway once I found out. The only question was whether you were going to tell me the truth or let me find out on my own. I thought maybe it would just end on its own, that Dominic would realize what he was risking and back off. And when he didn't, I didn't know what to do. I was in too deep, and I couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everything. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. "So instead, you decided to destroy me. That wasn't the plan. Wasn't it? Because those text messages Susie read today sure made it sound like you and Dominic had a very specific plan for making me look like the problem." She didn't deny it, which was somehow worse than if she'd tried to lie again. "I'm filing for divorce," I said quietly. "Greg, I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly why. Not because I want to hurt you more than I already have, but because I'm done pretending. I'm done being the guy who doesn't notice things. I'm done being everyone's punchline. What about everything we built together? 8 years of marriage, our house, our life? You should have thought about that before you decided to build a different life with someone else." I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my arm. "Please don't do this. Not like this." I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times she'd touched me with love instead of desperation. "You made your choice, Alicia. Now I'm making mine." The week following the fall festival was surreal. Everywhere I went, people wanted to talk about what had happened. Some offered sympathy, others wanted details, and a few seemed disappointed that the drama was over. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Alicia had moved out of our house and was staying with her sister across town. Dominic, meanwhile, was dealing with his own fallout. Susie had made good on her promise to file for divorce, and she wasn't being quiet about her reasons. The whole town knew that both marriages were ending because of the affair, but knowing about it and proving it in court were two different things. I was sitting in my lawyer's office on Thursday morning, going over the divorce paperwork, when he delivered some unwelcome news. The problem, Jim Hendricks explained, is that while everyone knows about the affair, we don't have the kind of documentation we'd need to prove adultery in court. What about the security footage, the text messages? The security footage shows a kiss, which could be explained away as a friendly gesture taken out of context. The text messages were obtained without Dominic's permission, so they might not be admissible. He leaned back in his chair. Look, Greg, I'm not saying we can't win this, but Alicia's lawyer is good, and she's going to argue that you were controlling and suspicious, that the marriage was already in trouble before any alleged affair began. Alleged affair? Jim, half the town saw what happened at the festival. And the other half will testify that you orchestrated a public humiliation of your wife based on suspicions and hearsay. He pulled out a folder. I've already received a preliminary response from her attorney. They're claiming that your behavior has been erratic and controlling for months, that Alicia was afraid to tell you about her friendship with Dominic because of how you'd react. I stared at the papers he'd handed me. It was exactly the strategy Dominic and Alicia had discussed in their text messages. Paint me as the problem. Make the affair look like a response to an already troubled marriage. So what do you recommend? We need more evidence. Something that clearly establishes the timeline and nature of their relationship. Bank records, hotel receipts, something concrete that shows this was an ongoing affair, not just a friendship that crossed a line. I left the lawyer's office feeling frustrated and defeated. After everything that had happened, after all the public drama and humiliation, it might still come down to a he said, she said situation in court. That's when I remembered something Susie had mentioned during our conversation at the diner. She'd said that Dominic left his phone at her house the night of the Halloween party, but what else might he have left behind over the months of sneaking around? I called her that afternoon. I need to ask you something, I said. When you went through Dominic's things, did you find anything else? Receipts? Notes? Anything that might prove the affair? I found plenty, she replied grimly. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants and hotels, a spare key to someplace I've never been, even a few pictures on his laptop that I wish I could unsee. Would you be willing to share those with my lawyer? Greg, I'd be willing to take out a full-page ad in the newspaper if it would help nail them both. We arranged to meet that evening at her apartment. What she showed me was even more damaging than I'd hoped. Dominic had been careless with his record-keeping, leaving a clear trail of his activities over the past 3 months. Restaurant receipts from places he'd never taken Susie. Hotel charges for rooms booked during times when he'd claimed to be working late. Credit card statements showing purchases at lingerie stores and jewelry shops, gifts that had never made it home to his wife. This is perfect, I said, photographing each document. This proves the affair was ongoing and premeditated. There's more, Susie said. She pulled out a small notebook. I found this in his gym bag. Looks like he was keeping track of when and where they met. The notebook was a goldmine. Dominic had recorded dates, times, and locations for dozens of meetings with Alicia over the past 3 months. Some entries included details that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Why would he write this down? Because he's an idiot, Susie replied. Always has been. He probably thought it was romantic, keeping a record of their secret affair. Can I take this to my lawyer? Take whatever you need. I'm done protecting him. Armed with this new evidence, I scheduled another meeting with Jim Hendricks. His reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. This changes everything, he said, flipping through the notebook. With this documentation, combined with the other evidence, we can establish a clear pattern of deception and adultery. Alicia's attorney won't be able to claim this was just a friendship that got out of hand. So what's our next move? We file an amended petition citing adultery as grounds for divorce. With this evidence, we should be able to secure a favorable settlement, including the house and a significant portion of your joint assets. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt empty. This wasn't how I'd imagined my marriage ending, with lawyers and evidence and strategic maneuvering. I'd always thought that if Alicia and I ever split up, it would be amicable, civilized. But then again, I'd never imagined she'd cheat on me either. The amended divorce petition was filed on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Alicia's lawyer had called Jim in a panic, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss settlement terms. They know they're in trouble, Jim explained. With the evidence we have, fighting this in court would be a disaster for them. They want to negotiate. What kind of settlement are they offering? Basically everything you asked for. You keep the house, the retirement accounts, and most of the joint assets. She takes her personal belongings and her car, and you both walk away with your own debts. It was a better outcome than I dared to hope for, but it felt hollow somehow. 8 years of marriage reduced to a division of assets and a legal document. There's one more thing, Jim said. They want a confidentiality clause. No public discussion of the reasons for the divorce, no sharing of the evidence we've collected. Absolutely not. Greg, think about this carefully. A confidentiality clause would prevent them from making any public statements about your behavior during the marriage. It cuts both ways. I don't care. I'm not going to help them cover this up. The truth is already out there, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen just to make them feel better. Jim nodded. I'll let them know that's not acceptable. That evening, I was at home trying to figure out what to do with Alicia's remaining belongings when my phone rang. It was Richard. You need to get down to the bar, he said. Now. What's wrong? Just get here. Trust me. I found Richard behind the bar, serving drinks to a crowd that was larger than usual for a Friday night. But what caught my attention was the conversation happening at a corner table. Alicia and Dominic, their heads close together, voices low but urgent. How long have they been here? I asked. About an hour. They've been arguing about something, getting louder as they drink more. Richard poured me a beer without being asked. Thought you might want to hear what they're saying. I found a seat at the bar where I could watch them without being obvious about it. Their body language told a story of two people under enormous stress. Alicia kept gesturing angrily, while Dominic looked defensive and frustrated. Can't believe you kept that notebook, I heard her say during a lull in the bar's ambient noise. I didn't know Susie would go through my stuff, he replied. You didn't think she'd be suspicious after everything that happened? God, Dominic, how could you be so careless? Me? You're the one who wanted to meet in public places. You're the one who said we didn't need to worry about Greg finding out. Their voices were rising, drawing attention from other patrons. I could see people starting to listen in, phones discreetly positioned to record whatever might happen next. This is your fault, Alicia continued. If you hadn't pushed so hard, if you'd just been patient. Patient? I was patient for 3 months while you kept saying you needed more time to figure things out. I was patient while you went home to him every night and pretended to be the perfect wife. I was trying to protect everyone. You were trying to have it both ways, and now we're both screwed because of it. I watched this argument unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. These were two people who'd been willing to destroy their marriages for each other, and now they were turning on each other when the consequences caught up with them. Maybe we should leave town, Alicia suggested. Start over somewhere else. With what money? My wife is taking half of everything, and your husband is getting the house and the savings accounts. We'll figure it out. We love each other, right? That has to count for something. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Do we? Love each other, I mean. The question hung in the air between them. Alicia stared at him, apparently shocked that he would even ask. Of course we do. Why else would we have risked everything? I don't know. Excitement, boredom, the thrill of sneaking around? He took a long drink from his beer. But love? Real love? I'm not so sure anymore. You don't mean that, don't I? Because sitting here, looking at what this has cost both of us, I'm starting to wonder if it was worth it. Alicia's face crumpled. So that's it? You're just going to give up? Walk away like none of this mattered? What do you want me to say, Alicia? That I'm ready to ride off into the sunset with you? That we're going to live happily ever after? He shook his head. Look around. Everyone in this bar knows what we did. Everyone in this town is talking about us. Do you really think we can just pretend that's not going to follow us wherever we go? People forget. They move on to the next scandal. Maybe, but I won't. Every time I look at you, I'm going to remember what it cost me to be with you. My marriage, my reputation, my friends, everything. The conversation was getting more heated, and I could see other patrons starting to pay closer attention. This was exactly the kind of public breakdown that would fuel gossip for months. You're being cruel, Alicia said, tears starting to flow. I'm being honest. For the first time in months, I'm being completely honest. Dominic stood up, throwing money on the table. I think we should call it quits while we still have some dignity left. Dignity? You think we have any dignity left after what happened at the festival? No, but we could stop digging the hole deeper. He walked away, leaving Alicia sitting alone at the table. She sat there for several minutes, crying quietly, before gathering her things and heading for the door. I watched her go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to go after her, to offer comfort to the woman I'd spent 8 years with. But a larger part of me recognized that this wasn't my problem anymore. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. That was hard to watch, Richard said quietly. Yeah, it was. You okay? I considered the question. Was I okay? My marriage was gone. My wife had betrayed me with a man I'd once called a friend, and the whole town had seen the wreckage play out like a cheap drama. The part of me that used to crave order and predictability wanted to collapse under the humiliation of it. But beneath the shame and exhaustion, there was something else, a quiet relief. I was free now, free from the tension that had crept into every conversation, from the excuses, from the constant ache of pretending not to notice what was right in front of me. I think I will be, I said finally. Jim gave a small nod. Good. Because whatever happens next, you handled this the right way. You didn't let them make you the villain in their story. No, I said, half a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I guess I didn't. I finished my beer and went home to the house that was now officially mine. It felt different that night. Emptier, yes, but clean in a way it hadn't for a long time. Every room echoed honesty. No more whispers behind closed doors, no more phantom perfume in the air. Just quiet. Just me. For the first time in months, I slept without waking in the middle of the night to check for lies. Monday morning came faster than I wanted it to. The settlement conference was scheduled for 10, but I arrived early, dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn the day I married her. Funny how things circle back. The fabric felt heavier now, but it fit better somehow, like it had adjusted to the new version of me. Jim Hendricks met me in the courthouse lobby, a leather briefcase in hand, and his expression as calm and deliberate as ever. Remember, he said as we walked toward the conference room, they're going to try to make this about your behavior, not theirs. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and let me handle the legal arguments. What if they try to push the confidentiality clause again? I asked. They will, Jim said flatly. And you'll say no again. They're afraid of exposure, not negotiation. The more they push for secrecy, the better your position looks. The conference room was smaller than I expected. No grand courtroom drama here, just fluorescent lights, a long table with water pitchers, and the faint smell of old coffee. Alicia was already seated across from us. She looked thinner, paler, her hair pulled back too tightly, the gold of her wedding ring glinting every time she fidgeted with it. The irony didn't escape me. Her lawyer, Patricia Wells, had the practiced air of someone who thrived on tension. Everything about her, from the crisp navy suit to the razor-sharp tone, was designed to command control. "Good morning," Patricia said as we took our seats. "I trust we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably." "That depends on your client's willingness to accept responsibility for her actions," Jim said evenly. Patricia smiled the way lawyers do when they think they're about to dismantle you. "My client is prepared to accept that the marriage is irretrievably broken. However, we maintain that both parties contributed to its breakdown." I opened my mouth to respond, but Jim's hand landed lightly on my arm, a silent warning. He leaned forward, voice calm and crisp. "My client has extensive documentation proving that Mrs. Thompson engaged in an ongoing extramarital affair. The breakdown of this marriage is entirely attributable to her adultery." Patricia reached into her briefcase and produced a thick folder, too thick, I thought, for a woman who claimed innocence. "We have our own documentation," she said, showing a pattern of controlling and suspicious behavior on Mr. Thompson's part. Text messages demanding to know my client's whereabouts, credit card monitoring, and increasingly erratic conduct culminating in the public humiliation at the Fall Festival. Jim didn't flinch. "The Fall Festival incident occurred after Mr. Thompson discovered evidence of the affair," he said. His reaction, while public, was entirely understandable given the circumstances. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Understandable? Or was it the calculated revenge of a man who couldn't accept that his wife was unhappy in their marriage? The words hit like a slap, but I forced myself to stay still. Jim's grip on my arm tightened slightly, a reminder that anger was the weapon they wanted me to use against myself. Mrs. Thompson's happiness or unhappiness is irrelevant to the legal question of adultery, Jim replied. The evidence clearly shows that she engaged in an intimate relationship with Dominic Martinez while still married to my client. Alleged intimate relationship, Patricia corrected smoothly. The evidence you've provided could be interpreted in various ways. I almost laughed at that. Photos, text messages, time-stamped hotel receipts, witness statements. Various ways was a generous stretch. But I stayed silent. For once, I was letting someone else do the fighting for me. And as I sat there watching Alicia twist her ring like she could spin a different truth out of metal and guilt, I realized something. This was the final unraveling. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no last-minute confession. Just the cold, methodical machinery of consequences grinding on. And maybe that was exactly what justice looked like after all. Jim smiled and opened his own briefcase. Perhaps we should review that evidence more carefully. What followed was a methodical destruction of every argument Patricia tried to make. Jim presented the restaurant receipts, the hotel charges, the notebook entries, and the text messages in a sequence that painted an undeniable picture of deliberate deception and ongoing adultery. With each piece of evidence, I watched Alicia sink lower in her chair. She'd probably hoped that her lawyer could create enough reasonable doubt to secure a better settlement. Instead, she was being confronted with the full scope of her betrayal laid out in black and white. "This is quite comprehensive," Patricia admitted after reviewing the notebook. "However, my client is still entitled to a fair division of marital assets." "Which is exactly what we're offering," Jim replied. "Mr. Thompson keeps the house, which he can afford to maintain on his income. Mrs. Thompson receives her personal belongings, her vehicle, and half of the liquid assets accumulated during the marriage." "That seems reasonable," Patricia said, then paused. "However, we would like to include a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Both parties would agree not to discuss the details of their marriage or divorce publicly." "Absolutely not," I said, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. Patricia turned to me. "Mr. Thompson, surely you can see the benefit of keeping private matters private. A confidentiality agreement would protect both of you from further embarrassment. It would protect her from further embarrassment. I've already been embarrassed enough, thanks to your client's behavior. Greg, Alicia spoke up for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. Please. Haven't we hurt each other enough? I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd loved for 8 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my bank account while secretly planning a life with someone else. Have we hurt each other? That's interesting phrasing considering I'm not the one who cheated. You're not the one who was ignored and taken for granted either. So that justifies lying to me for 3 months? That justifies sneaking around behind my back and making plans to humiliate me if I found out? Patricia tried to intervene. Perhaps we should focus on the settlement terms. No, I said firmly. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about how your client and her boyfriend plan to make me look like a paranoid, controlling husband if their affair came to light. Let's talk about how they laughed about my ignorance while they were screwing in hotel rooms I was paying for. Greg, that's not... Alicia started. That's not what? Not how it happened? Because I have the text messages that say otherwise. I have Dominic's notebook where he wrote down every detail of your secret relationship. I have credit card receipts and security footage and witness statements. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. You want to know what hurts the most? It's not even the cheating. It's the fact that you thought so little of me that you believed I'd never figure it out. You thought I was so boring, so oblivious, so pathetic that you could carry on an affair right under my nose and I'd never notice. I never thought you were pathetic. Didn't you? Because that's sure how you and Dominic talked about me in those text messages. Poor, clueless Greg, so focused on his spreadsheets that he can't see what's happening in his own marriage. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry for how this happened. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me you were unhappy instead of finding comfort with someone else. Fair would have been asking for a divorce before you started sneaking around. Fair would have been treating me with enough respect to end our marriage honestly. I was scared. Of what? Of losing the house, the financial security? Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You wanted to have your affair and keep your comfortable life too. Patricia cleared her throat. I think we're getting off track here. The question is whether my client is entitled to half of the marital assets. Your client forfeited her claim to an equal division when she committed adultery, Jim said. Under state law, fault can be considered in property division. The adultery wasn't the cause of the marriage's breakdown. It was a symptom of existing problems. Problems that could have been addressed through counseling or honest communication, not through deception and betrayal. I sat back down, feeling drained. Look, I don't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. I'll stick to the settlement terms we've already proposed. She gets her car, her personal belongings, and $25,000 from our savings account. I keep the house and the retirement accounts. That's not half of the marital assets, Patricia protested. It's more than she deserves, considering she spent 3 months lying to my face and planning to destroy my reputation if she got caught. Alicia looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I never wanted to destroy your reputation. I didn't know how to end things without hurting everyone. So you decided to hurt me in private instead of in public. How considerate. I loved you, Greg. I still love you in a way. No, you don't. You love the security I provided. You love the comfortable life we built together. But you don't love me, because if you did, you never could have done what you did. The room fell silent. Patricia shuffled through her papers, clearly trying to figure out a way to salvage something for her client. Jim sat quietly, letting the weight of my words settle over everyone. Finally, Alicia spoke. What do you want from me? What would it take for you to forgive me? Nothing. There's nothing you can do or say that would make this okay. The woman I married wouldn't have cheated on me. The woman I married wouldn't have lied to me for months. The woman I married wouldn't have made plans to humiliate me if her affair was discovered. I met her eyes across the table. That woman is gone, if she ever existed at all. So that's it? 8 years of marriage just over? You ended it the first time you kissed him. Everything since then has just been paperwork. Patricia closed her folder with a snap. My client accepts the proposed settlement terms. What about the confidentiality agreement? Jim asked. We withdraw that request. I was surprised. Why? Patricia looked at Alicia, who nodded slightly. Because you're right, Alicia said quietly. I made my choices, and I need to live with the consequences. All of them. The rest of the meeting was procedural, signing papers, establishing timelines, working out the logistics of transferring assets and changing account names. It was surreal how quickly 8 years of marriage could be reduced to legal documents and financial transactions. As we prepared to leave, Alicia approached me one last time. For what it's worth, she said, I really am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for all of it. You deserved better. Yes, I did. But I'm going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. What will you do now? I thought about the question. What would I do now? For the first time in months, the future felt open, full of possibilities instead of obligations. I'm going to live my life without worrying about whether someone is lying to me. I'm going to trust people until they give me a reason not to. And I'm going to remember that boring and predictable isn't the worst thing a person can be. She nodded, understanding. Take care of yourself, Greg. You too, Alicia. And next time you're unhappy in a relationship, try talking to your partner before you start looking for a replacement. As I walked out of the courthouse, Jim clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than I expected. How do you feel? Tired? Relieved? A little sad, but mostly relieved. Any regrets about the confidentiality clause? None. The truth is already out there, and I'm not going to help her hide from it. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with them. What about Dominic? I heard his divorce is getting ugly, too. I smiled grimly. Susie's not as forgiving as I am. She's going after everything. The house, the cars, his retirement account, even his gym membership. Apparently, she's been documenting his behavior for years, not just the affair. Sounds like he picked the wrong woman to cheat on. Yeah, well, that's his problem now. I'm done caring about what happens to either of them. That evening, I sat in my living room now, and tried to process everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The house felt different without Alicia's presence, but not necessarily worse, just quieter, more honest. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. How did it go? It's over, I typed back. Officially divorced as of today. Drinks to celebrate? I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to go out, to mark this transition with friends and alcohol and loud music. But another part of me just wanted to sit in my own space and appreciate the silence. Rain check, I replied. I think I need a quiet night. Understood. But Greg? Yeah. You did good. You handled this whole thing with more class than most people would have managed. Thanks. That means a lot. I set the phone aside and looked around the room. There were gaps on the shelves where Alicia's books used to be, empty spaces on the walls where her pictures had hung. But instead of making the house feel incomplete, these absences felt like opportunities, space for new books, new pictures, new memories. For the first time since Halloween night, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I thought the drama was behind me. I was wrong. I was grabbing lunch at Murphy's Diner when I overheard a conversation at the next table that made my appetite disappear. Heard she's telling people that Greg was abusive. Says that's why she had the affair because she was afraid to leave. That's not what I heard. Someone told me he was controlling her money, monitoring her phone calls. Well, something must have happened. Women don't just cheat for no reason. I turned around to see who was talking. Two women I recognized but didn't know well, probably friends of Alicia's from the boutique where she used to work. They noticed me looking and had the decency to appear embarrassed, but the damage was done. After lunch, I drove straight to Richard's bar. It was early afternoon, so the place was nearly empty except for a couple of regulars nursing beers and watching sports on the television. "You look like someone who needs a drink," Richard said when he saw me. "I need information. Have you heard anything about Alicia spreading stories about our marriage?" His expression darkened. "What kind of stories?" "The kind that make me look like an abusive husband who drove his wife into another man's arms." "Sit down." He poured me a beer without asking. "Yeah, I've heard some rumors. Nothing specific, just whispers about how things really were between you two." "And people are believing it?" "Some are. You know how it works in a town this size. People love drama, and a story about a controlling husband is more interesting than a simple cheating wife." I took a long drink, trying to process this new development. She agreed to drop the confidentiality clause. I thought that meant she was going to accept responsibility for what happened. Maybe she changed her mind, or maybe someone convinced her that offense is the best defense. Someone like Dominic? Could be. I heard his divorce isn't going well. Susie's taking him for everything he's worth, and his reputation around town is shot. Maybe he figures if he can rehabilitate his image by making you the villain, it'll help his case. The thought of Dominic and Alicia working together to rewrite history made my jaw clench. What exactly are people saying? That you were jealous and possessive, that you monitored her activities and isolated her from her friends, that the affair was her way of finding someone who treated her with respect. That's completely backward. She's the one who was lying and sneaking around. I know that, and most people with half a brain know that too, but there are always going to be some who prefer the more dramatic version of events. I finished my beer and stood up. I need to put a stop to this before it gets out of hand. What are you planning to do? I'm going to remind everyone what really happened, and I'm going to make sure they have all the facts this time. My first stop was Jim Hendrix's office. If Alicia was spreading false stories about our marriage, there might be legal remedies available. Defamation is hard to prove, Jim explained after I told him what I'd heard. You'd need to show that she made specific false statements that damaged your reputation, and that she knew they were false when she made them. What about all the evidence we collected for the divorce? Doesn't that prove she's lying? It proves she had an affair, but it doesn't necessarily disprove claims about your behavior during the marriage. A jury might think both things could be true, that you were controlling and she cheated. So there's nothing I can do legally? Not unless you can prove specific instances of defamation with witnesses and documentation. And even then, a lawsuit would just create more drama and give her claims more publicity. I left the lawyer's office feeling frustrated and helpless. It seemed like Alicia was going to get away with rewriting our history, turning herself from the cheating wife into the victimized woman who had no choice but to seek comfort elsewhere. But then, I remembered something Susie had said during our planning session for the fall festival confrontation. We don't have to lie about anything. We just have to make sure the truth comes out at the right time, in the right way. That evening, I sat down at my computer and began typing. If Alicia wanted to tell her version of our marriage, fine. But I was going to tell mine too, and I was going to back it up with evidence. The letter I wrote was 3 pages long, single-spaced, and meticulously documented. I started with a timeline of our marriage, highlighting the good times as well as the problems we'd faced together. I acknowledged that we'd grown apart in recent years, that we'd both made mistakes, and that our relationship wasn't perfect. But then, I laid out the facts of her affair with surgical precision. The dates, the locations, the lies she'd told to cover her tracks. I included excerpts from the text messages and notebook entries, showing how she and Dominic had planned to manipulate the situation if they were caught. Most importantly, I addressed the claims she was apparently making about my behavior. I provided evidence, bank statements showing she had full access to our accounts, phone records proving I'd never monitored her calls, testimonials from friends and co-workers who could vouch for how I'd treated her during our marriage. When I finished writing, I printed 50 copies and began distributing them strategically around town. I left copies at Murphy's Diner, the grocery store bulletin board, the library, and several other places where people gathered to talk and share information. I also posted the letter on every local social media group I could find, along with selected pieces of evidence to back up my claims. The response was immediate and dramatic. By the next morning, my phone was ringing constantly. Some callers were supportive, thanking me for setting the record straight. Others were critical, saying I was airing dirty laundry that should have stayed private. But everyone was talking about it, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. The most interesting call came from Janet Morrison, Alicia's former co-worker at the boutique. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Alicia told us a very different story about what happened between you two. After reading your letter and seeing the evidence, I realized we were only getting one side." "What exactly did she tell you?" "That you'd been suspicious and controlling for months before the affair started. That you went through her phone and questioned her about every errand she ran. That the affair was her way of finding someone who trusted and respected her." "And you believe that?" We wanted to support our friend. But looking back, there were things that didn't add up. Like how she always seemed happy when she talked about Dominic, not scared or guilty like you'd expect from someone having an affair to escape an abusive marriage. "I appreciate you calling, Janet. It means a lot. There's something else you should know. Alicia's been meeting with some of the other women in town, trying to get them to support her version of events. She's planning some kind of public response to your letter." "What kind of response?" "I don't know the details, but she's organizing a group of women to speak out about domestic abuse and how affairs can be a cry for help from victims who feel trapped." The irony was staggering. Alicia was planning to use her adultery as evidence that she was the victim, not the perpetrator. It was a bold strategy, but also a risky one if people started asking too many questions. "When is this supposed to happen?" "This weekend, at the farmer's market. She's reserved a booth to distribute information about domestic abuse resources." I thanked Janet and hung up, my mind racing. Alicia was escalating the situation, trying to turn public opinion in her favor by claiming the moral high ground. But she was also giving me an opportunity to confront her lies in a very public forum. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the farmer's market. I arrived early, ostensibly to buy vegetables, but really to scout out Alicia's booth and see what she was planning. She'd set up a professional-looking display with pamphlets about domestic abuse, statistics about women who stay in bad marriages, and testimonials from local women about their experiences with controlling partners. A banner across the front of the booth read, "Break the silence, supporting women who find the courage to leave." It was a masterful piece of manipulation. Anyone who didn't know the full story would see a brave woman speaking out about domestic abuse. The fact that she'd cheated on her husband would be reframed as a desperate attempt to find safety and support. A small crowd had gathered around the booth, mostly women who were listening sympathetically as Alicia spoke about the importance of recognizing the signs of emotional abuse. "Sometimes," she was saying, "women find themselves in relationships where they're constantly questioned, monitored, and made to feel like they can't be trusted. When that happens, they might seek comfort and validation from someone who treats them with respect." "Is that what happened to you?" someone in the crowd asked. "I'm not here to talk about my personal situation," Alicia replied with practiced humility. "I'm here to help other women recognize that they deserve better than to live in fear and suspicion." It was a clever answer. She was talking about her personal situation without appearing to do so, painting herself as the victim, while maintaining plausible deniability. I watched this performance for several minutes, feeling my anger build. She was using real issues that real women faced to justify her own selfish choices. She was turning domestic abuse into a shield to hide behind while she rewrote history to suit her narrative. Finally, I'd heard enough. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "I have a question." The crowd turned to look at me, and I could see recognition dawning on several faces. This was about to get interesting. "Of course," Alicia said, though her voice had gone tight with tension. "You're talking about women who are monitored and questioned by their husbands. But what about women who lie to their husbands? What about women who sneak around and have affairs while their partners trust them completely?" "That's not what this booth is about," she replied, but her composure was starting to crack. "Isn't it? Because it seems like you're trying to justify adultery by claiming it was a response to abuse. But what if there was no abuse? What if the wife was just selfish and dishonest?" "I think you should leave," one of Alicia's supporters said. "Why? This is a public forum, and she's making public claims about domestic abuse. I think the community deserves to hear all sides of the story." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved screenshots of the text messages between Alicia and Dominic. "For example," I continued, "here's a text message where my ex-wife discusses how to lie about her affair if she gets caught. She's not planning to escape an abusive marriage. She's planning to manipulate the situation to make herself look like the victim." I began reading the messages aloud, the same ones Susie had shared with the crowd at the fall festival. But this time, the context was different. This time, Alicia was claiming to be a domestic abuse survivor, and the messages proved she was lying. "Stop," Alicia said, her voice breaking. "You're taking those out of context." "Am I? Because they seem pretty clear to me. You and your boyfriend discussing how to make me look paranoid and controlling if your affair came to light. That doesn't sound like the behavior of an abuse victim. It sounds like the behavior of someone who knows she's doing something wrong and wants to avoid consequences." The crowd was murmuring now, people turning to each other with confused and uncomfortable expressions. This wasn't the simple story of female empowerment they'd expected to hear. "You don't understand what it was like," Alicia said desperately. "Living with someone who was always working, always distant, never paying attention. So you decided to get attention from someone else's husband instead of talking to your own? It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Because I have 3 months' worth of evidence that says otherwise. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, a notebook where your boyfriend documented every detail of your secret relationship." I looked around at the crowd. Does that sound like a woman desperately trying to escape abuse, or does it sound like someone having fun behind her husband's back? "Greg, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." "Don't do what? Tell the truth? Because that's all I'm doing. You want to talk about domestic abuse? Fine. Let's talk about the abuse of trust. Let's talk about the emotional abuse of lying to someone for months while pretending to love them. Let's talk about the psychological abuse of making someone question their own sanity when they start to suspect something's wrong." The crowd was completely silent now, watching this confrontation unfold with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident. "You want to help women recognize when they deserve better?" I continued. "Here's some advice. If you're unhappy in your marriage, try counseling. Try honest communication. Try working on your problems together. But don't lie, cheat, and then claim you were the victim when you get caught." Alicia was crying now, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing in real time. Several of her supporters looked uncomfortable, probably wondering how much of what she'd told them was actually true. "I made mistakes," she said through her tears. "But that doesn't mean..." "It doesn't mean what? That you should take responsibility for your actions? That you should stop trying to rewrite history to make yourself look better?" I put my phone away and looked around at the crowd one more time. I'm not here to attack domestic abuse survivors or minimize the real struggles that women face in bad relationships. But I am here to make sure that real victims aren't overshadowed by someone who's using their pain to justify her own selfish choices. I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Alicia one more time. You had 8 years to talk to me about any problems in our marriage. 8 years to ask for counseling or space or even a divorce if you were that unhappy. Instead, you chose to lie and cheat and then play the victim when you got caught. That's not surviving abuse, that's just being a coward. As I walked away from the farmer's market, I could hear the buzz of conversation starting up behind me. People were talking, questioning, reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the situation. My phone started ringing before I even made it to my car. The first call was from Richard. Holy crap, man. Please tell me someone recorded that. Probably. Why? Because that was the most epic takedown I've ever witnessed. You completely destroyed her narrative. I just told the truth. Yeah, but you told it at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. She's not going to recover from this. He was right. By Monday morning, the story of what happened at the farmer's market had spread throughout the town. The consensus seemed to be that Alicia had overplayed her hand, that trying to claim victim status while the evidence of her deception was so clear had backfired spectacularly. I heard through the grapevine that she'd left town, going to stay with relatives in another state while things cooled down. Dominic, meanwhile, was dealing with his own problems. Susie's divorce lawyer had used the farmer's market incident as evidence of his continued attempts to manipulate and deceive, resulting in an even less favorable settlement for him. That evening, I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, watching the sunset and reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. My phone buzzed with a text from Susie. Saw the video from the farmer's market. Well done. Thanks. How are you holding up? Better every day. Divorce should be final next week, and then I can start over fresh. Any regrets? About leaving Dominic? None. About helping you expose the truth? None. About trusting the wrong people for so long? Every day. We all make mistakes. Yeah, but some mistakes teach us important lessons. I'll never be that naive again. I set the phone aside and took another sip of my beer. The house behind me was quiet, but it wasn't the oppressive quiet of secrets and lies. It was the peaceful quiet of honesty and solitude. For the first time since Halloween night, I felt completely at peace with my choices. I'd refused to be the victim of someone else's deception. I'd refused to let lies stand unchallenged. I'd refused to let my reputation be destroyed by people who'd betrayed my trust. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's just refusing to let other people write your story for you. The sun disappeared behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. But tonight, I was content to sit in my own space, surrounded by my own truth, finally free from the weight of other people's lies. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the town settling in for the evening, cars driving home from work, children playing in backyards, the normal rhythms of life continuing as they always had. But for me, everything had changed. I was no longer the man who didn't notice things, who trusted blindly, who let other people define his reality. I was something better, a man who knew his own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. The story was over, but my life was just beginning.